I won't tell you that this is my third take on this, but welcome to our second objective, where we're going to talk a little bit about game theory. But we're first going to explore how a oligopoly might choose to behave like a monopoly and why they might do that. We're also going to talk a little bit about collusion, which is illegal. But collusion would be where two or more firms get together and decide that they're going to restrict the output to keep the price artificially high. And we see this in OPEC and cartels and things like that. We're going to learn through this that because of game theory, and the idea and the incentive is for us not to stick to agreements that we set. So let's go ahead and get after it. I think the best way to kind of explain this is to talk about it in terms of an example. And I'm going to go ahead and use the example that Mankiw uses here because I think it works out well. Here we have a cell phone duopoly in a small town. And we're going to go ahead and see the demand schedule. We have 140 residents. The good is cell phone service with unlimited anytime minutes and a free phone. And here's our demand schedule off to the left here. Okay, so in this demand schedule, we have a quantity equilibrium, if you will, of 140. And obviously, if you look at the demand schedule, if we produce 140, we couldn't charge anything. So that's probably not what we're going to produce. Now, what we have are some different alternatives. In this particular example, we have a duopoly. And a duopoly means there are two firms. We're going to use T-Mobile and Verizon. Now, our costs, each firm's marginal cost is 10, fixed costs are 0. If we add, so that means that if our fixed costs are 0, our variable costs must be 10, right? Because if you add fixed and variable together, you get total cost. So our total costs here are going to be $10 times the quantity, because we only have variable costs in this particular example. Okay, let's get some additional information about this small town cell phone service. We can look at revenues, and remember, revenue is just, goodness, I have cords everywhere here. Okay, and our revenue is just going to be our price times our quantity. Okay, so 0 times 140 gave us the 0. 5 times 130 gave us the 650. We then can take a look at what are our costs. And remember, these are going to be our total costs here because it's marginal cost times quantity. Okay. And here we have our costs. So kind of simple if you just look at it. It's 140 times the $10 marginal cost. The 130 times the $10 marginal cost. Okay. We also know that if we take our total revenue and subtract our total cost, we end up with profitability. So our next shows the profitability. Okay, now looking down the profitability, we have a couple of things that we want to kind of look at here. The first one is we like to maximize profitability. That's what we've been talking about in all of our slides. So the profitability is highest at 1,800. We also know that if we were decide to be a perfectly competitive market, okay, in a perfectly competitive market, marginal revenue equals marginal cost. And remember, marginal revenue is just price in a perfectly competitive market or average revenue. And since we have price here, we can just go down the price and say, since our marginal cost here in the previous slide, they told us it was 10, that's why our price here will be 10, and this would be a perfectly competitive market. Let's take a look down here at where profit is maximized. If, for example, these two firms get together and decide that they are going to intentionally withhold quantity, so they're going to restrict quantity by making an agreement. So how about T-Mobile? You produce a quantity of 30, and Verizon, you produce a quantity of 30, and if we stick to this deal, then we'll have a quantity of 60 in the market, and look at how much higher the price will be at $40. And this is where our profitability would be for a monopoly. So through collusion, and that's what we're talking about here, an agreement between these two competitors, we're going to restrict the quantity in order to get a higher price. Okay, let me go ahead and erase this. Okay, so we see that the perfectly competitive outcome is here in green, and the monopolistic outcome is here in pink. So if they do decide to collude and act like a monopoly, again, they're going to only agree, so they agree to each produce half of the monopoly output. In this case, they each agree to produce 30 each, so the quantity in the market will be 60, and that's just the 30 times the 2. So for each firm, the profitability ends up being 900. So let's look at how we determine that. So remember that profit is equal to total revenue minus total cost. Our total revenue is equal to price times quantity. In this example, our total cost is just marginal cost times the quantity. So let's go ahead and do that and make sure we get 900 as well. So our price is $40. Our quantity that each is producing is 30. So that gives us $1,200. Our marginal cost is 10 times the quantity of 30. That gives us 300. If we subtract 300 from 1,200, we get 900. So that's where the 900 comes from. Okay, so they perform and agree to this. Yeah. Okay. Agree to this in collusion so they can restrict the quantity and get a higher price. Okay, when they do that, again, we're producing right here in our monopolistic type of arrangement. Now, if T-Mobile decides that there is still unmet market share here and they could produce an additional 10 units, what would happen to the market price? Okay, so right now, at the outset up here, with the agreement, we have a quantity in the market equal to 60. And because we have that, our price using the demand schedule is going to be 40. Now, T-Mobile decides to produce 10 more. So now our quantity in the market is going to be 70, just the 60 plus 10. When we do that, this is what happens. As the quantity increases, the price decreases to $35. So what is T-Mobile's profits? Okay, so the market price decreases. That's the first part of the question. The second part is what happens to profitability. So remember, total revenue minus total cost. Our total revenue here is going to be the 40% price times quantity, sorry, price times quantity. And now our price is at $35. Our quantity is at 40. So that means our total revenues are going to equal, just a minute, I need my calculator here. 35 times 40, how about $1,400 is our total revenue. Our total cost then, put it over here, is going to be our marginal cost times quantity. Our marginal cost is 10 times 40 is our quantity. So our marginal cost is 400. If we subtract the 1,400 total revenue from the 400 total cost, we end up with $1,000. Now, which would you rather have? An economic profitability of 900, as we saw sticking to the agreement, or an economic profitability of 1,000. Remember that the firm's incentive is shareholder wealth maximization or profitability. So T-Mobile's profits would increase by $100. Now that is incentive, and we've said people respond to incentives. So that's a real good reason not to stick to this deal. Let me go ahead and erase this, and we're going to go ahead with the question. Is it in T-Mobile's interest to renege on the agreement? Well, definitely, because they're going to earn $100 extra if they choose to produce more. I love the last part of this question. What if both firms renege and produce 40? Determine each firm's profit. So let me erase what I've done here. Okay, so now we have kind of a different example. And so now T-Mobile has reneged because it can produce more. And so Verizon reneges too. So now at this quantity, our quantity for the market is now 80. And at 80, the price goes down even farther. So let's just focus specifically on the second step of this and look at what happens to Verizon's profits. So again, our total revenue, price times quantity, so 30 times 80. Oh, no, I'm sorry, there should be 40 because we're looking at it individually. Let me erase that. Now you're killing me. Let's see. Here we go. Okay, there we go. Okay, 30 times 40, which equals 1,200. Okay, total cost is just marginal cost, $10 times 40, and that's 400. If we subtract the two, we end up with 800. Now, do you think that Verizon's going to go, well, we were earning 900, now we're only earning 800. Why are we only earning 800? Aha, because nasty T-Mobile decided that they wanted the $100 extra profit, and so therefore the overall collusion and the overall impetus to stick to the deal on both parts is to cheat on the deal. Okay, so one starts, the other one follows, and what it happens and what we really should take away from this is the idea that as the quantity increases, the price decreases. And this is because we originally restricted the quantity, but now when we find out that one person responds to additional profitability, that it drives the quantity up for the whole market, which drives the price down for all market participants. Okay. All right, so this just recaps it. So again, T-Mobile's profit goes up by 1,000, so their incentive is to cheat. Verizon will do the same, and so if both of them will end up at a much lower profitability than if they would have stuck to the original agreement of restricting output. This is an interesting idea because what it says to us is, should we always take governmental intervention against cartels? And what we tend to find is that not only is this illegal, but more so that there's an incentive built into this that says, hey, if I do what's in my best interest, the agreement will fall apart. So, difficult for oligopolies to honor these types of agreements. Let's look at the oligopoly equilibrium. So at present, if each firm produces 40, so that means our market quantity in the market, make that look more like a Q, quantity in the market. So here where we are, each firm's profit is 800. Is it in T-Mobile's interest to increase its output further to a quantity of 50? Okay, so our quantity in the market was 80. We're going to add in an additional 10 units. So the quantity in the market was 80. And now T-Mobile is going to produce another 10 units. So that's going to make our quantity in the market 90. Go ahead and chase a different, okay. Now we're at a quantity of 90. Notice that as the quantity increases, the price decreases, and the price is going to decrease to $25. So is it in their interest to do that? So we want to kind of compare to the profit that they had previously. So our total revenue, again, price times quantity is total revenue, and our price is $25. Our quantity is 90. Oh, nope, that's wrong. I keep wanting to do them together instead of individually. So let me just do them individually. Sorry about that. Pen, okay, is 50. There we go. So the total revenue in the market is 25 times 50. How about 1250? Our total cost is just our marginal cost, $10 in this example, times our quantity. So 10 times 50, which equals 500. And 1250 minus 500 is going to be 750, I think. Yep, 750. So, which would you rather have? $800 in profits or 750? I dare say that most of us would much rather have the $800 in profits than the 750. So is it in T-Mobile's interest to reduce output further? And the answer to that is absolutely no. Okay. Is it in Verizon's interest? Absolutely not, because it drives it down even further. And now we would end up with a scenario of here. So no. 750, same is true for Verizon. Okay. So let's talk about the equilibrium for an oligopoly, and it's based upon an idea called the Nash Equilibrium. And this is named for a mathematician, John Nash. If you've ever seen the movie A Beautiful Mind, you might recognize this. Russell Crowe stars, and up here is the YouTube clip that I like to show. John Nash talked about a thing called governing dynamics. Now, this is how I like to put it, okay? When we're talking about shareholder wealth maximization and profitability being the goal of a firm, it's almost like we think of ourselves first. So me, I comes first. What's best for us? And then we make that decision. Maybe, maybe not, that becomes the best for the group. Nash kind of said this is backwards. What we should be doing is flip-flop these. The first thing we should ask is what's best for the group? And then, by default, we will get what is best for us. Okay. Now, remember back to our example, T-Mobile and Verizon. If T-Mobile and Verizon would have stuck to the deal, they would have been better off. If they did what was best for the group, by default, they would do what is best for themselves, governing dynamics. Okay. All right, so now we're going to look at an oligopoly, and if they operate individually, again, we know that where are they going to choose to produce? Or marginal revenue equals marginal cost individually. So if we want to compare and contrast them with the industries we've already looked at, basically a monopoly will really restrict this quantity. I mean, very little quantity, so that their price can be substantially higher in the market. A competitive, perfectly competitive market, the competitive will have a huge amount of quantity, and their price will be relatively low in the market. An oligopoly is somewhere in between. It's more or greater than a monopoly, so they're going to produce at a higher quantity, the quantity of a monopoly, but they're going to produce less than the quantity of a perfectly competitive market. So you might put it this way: quantity perfectly competitive, quantity of a monopoly, and the quantity of an oligopoly. Okay, so the perfectly competitive market is going to be greater than an oligopoly, and an oligopoly will be greater than a monopoly. Now, in terms of pricing, because of this quantity, then the price is greater than a perfectly competitive market because we still are restricting that output. Okay, so if we look at the price, again, the price will be greater than a perfectly competitive market. So price in a perfectly competitive market, we know that the price in an oligopoly will be more, but the price of a monopoly will be greater still. Because again, it's all in how we're restricting quantity to increase the overall price here. And can we really do that on a long-term scale with the incentive to cheat on agreements? The output and price effects. So increasing output has two effects that we want to talk about. There's an output and a price effect. And the output effect basically says by selling one more, so as we look at the marginal, then the seller gets the market price. One more gallon of milk or whatever, then the seller gets the price in the market. So that additional quantity that they are, I think quantity might be a better thing to put here, the additional quantity that they are getting for that sale, they're going to get at the market price. But in selling that one more gallon, then what happens is that the price effect, the price in the market actually decreases. Okay, so the output effect. So if price is greater than marginal cost, then as we increase our output, that will increase profits because we're able to sell, like in the first example where we went from 30 to 40 with T-Mobile, they did increase their profitability. But what happened is raising production increases market quantity, which reduces the price and reduces the profit on all the units sold
effect. So we tend to see that as well.
If the price effect is smaller and the quantity effect favors more output whenever the price is above marginal cost. In that case, our Nash equilibrium will be closer to marginal cost than a monopoly price. The more firms in the oligopoly, the smaller the price effect will be. Okay, so let me just erase that so you can see. So if the output effect is greater than the price effect, the firm will increase production because they're making up for that because they get that increase in the market price, like you saw in the previous example. But if the price effect is greater than the output effect, then what we see is because the quantity increased, the market price decreases. So it's like a little in the beginning, that would be our output effect. And then toward the end, when everyone's reneging on the agreement, we have a price effect. Okay, as the number of firms increases, again, price effect is smaller, looks more like a perfectly competitive market. Price becomes closer to marginal cost, and we get closer to the quantity, which is socially efficient, or quantity equilibrium. Okay, that's the end of this particular lesson. Let me go ahead and stop my slide share with you. And so we've looked at here, we've talked a lot about Nash, but we haven't calculated that yet. In the next objective, we're going to look at the Nash equilibrium, the dominant strategy, and utilizing a payoff matrix to kind of come up with what these things will be. And what does that mean to us in the overall firm, in the overall goal of an oligopoly? Thank you.